Well, good morning, everybody. And Adele, thank you so much for warming things up. My name is Mike O'Connor. I'm here in the United States, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development for the Leadership Circle. It's a real privilege to be here with all of you. The overall purpose of this webinar is to provide some information to enhance your confidence and your competence in using the Leadership Circle in the serving of the leaders that you work with. And in doing this, there's a couple of things I would like us to keep in perspective. A reminder was sent to you within the last hour or two about this, an invitation to be joining. And with that, you were given access to a handout. You don't need this handout for today's call, but I'll be referencing it on occasion. If you have it available and printed out, it might be a place to take notes. But I'll give some explanation about what the purpose of this handout is. Number two, this is the first of a three-part series. So it's really important as you have questions, be sure to type them into the chat box. So that'll help inform us on important information or content that might be of interest to you before the next session, which I believe is in June. I also understand there's a lot of people on the call. There's a lot going on in the world. I'm going to also leave you with some suggestions on some other things you might be keeping as a priority to keep this conversation alive and to enhance your learning. So with all that, I first must just acknowledge we are in a really peculiar and unprecedented time across the world. And I want to remind us all about a purpose statement that all of you likely saw in your certification. This is the Leadership Circle's purpose statement, and it is, we exist to evolve the conscious practice of leadership. We do that to steward the planet, and we do that to awaken in all of us our inherent unity. It's more profound than ever. And when you think about all of us on this call, we've all been called to serve. The motivation and the skill sets you bring to this profession of coaching or organizational development, this motivation to join the Leadership Circle community, collectively, we all exist, and our purpose, more than ever, is to evolve the conscious practice of leadership. And that's what the Leadership Circle framework does. It provides information to help leaders make informed decisions about how they want to proceed in making things happen. So we together are evolving the conscious practice of leadership, and the world more than ever needs the planet to be stewarded. And it's just amazing across the world how we're seeing signs of us all awakening to a new and brilliant unity. So I start off here, just cannot say it louder. There's nothing more important than this call than this message. The world needs us now. And while I don't know you personally, the fact that you're part of this community, we have 6,000 of us across the world who have all joined into this common purpose. The world needs us now. They may think they're not ready. It might be an inconvenient time. The world needs us now. And so we'll be talking about this, but I make that point very, very loudly because whether people know it or not, the joy, the appreciation, the inquiry, the seeing people, all the things that we bring to this equation are necessary more now than ever. And as we think about instilling your confidence, I want you to go forth knowing, even if you're not 100% ready or experienced or ready to proceed forward, go with a lot of confidence that you're doing some real good. So with all that, today what we're hoping to do is discuss how to position the business of leadership, especially today with all the implications of what's going on with all of us as leaders across the world. And then there's this thing that we all do, this coaching and development that we all do as a profession, how to build a value proposition for that. All of these have to be foundational first. Understanding leadership, understanding the business, what's in it for leaders in this, building a business case for coaching. All of that has to happen first before we can really get into a business case for the Leadership Circle. In my role, I support people in writing proposals, doing marketing events, getting prepared for debriefs and such. And you can see the people that are new and are lacking confidence. The help they need, or what they're asking for, is help me understand the statistics. I don't understand the norm group. I need some brochures. I don't understand the 4 bars on the outside of the graph. And all those are legitimate questions. But they're missing the bigger point. They're missing the bigger point about this relationship is a trusted advisory role between you and another adult, a seemingly successful adult. You're inviting them in to open up their world, become vulnerable, get objective feedback, make some changes, hold themselves accountable. Even under the best of times, it's a big, big challenge. I make that point because the very first thing we have to do is we have to build a relationship. We have to sell us. The relationship has to be us. I don't care how awesome this assessment tool is that you represent. If I don't know you or trust you, if I don't understand your process, if I don't see where you can add value, I'm not likely to get too excited about the validity of the instrument or the norm group of 200,000 leaders or whatever the leadership circle can espouse. So I make that point as lesson point number one. Clients don't buy because they understand the features, the benefits, all the cool things about the leadership circle. People don't buy because of that. They buy because they feel understood. As I think about all the skills we need to show that we understand people. To show we understand people, we need to build trust and compassion and empathy. We need to ask questions. We need to ask follow-ups. We need to pause. We need to reflect. We need to set accountabilities. People feel understood when there's a relationship, and this relationship looks exactly like the skill sets that all of us brought in as we learned our coaching trade. So while it's really common, and I get it, I've been in sales for 30 years. People don't like to sell. They don't understand it. They think it's kind of slimy. Yeah, but we're not selling used cars here. We're selling organizational change. We're selling the ability for people to be at their very best. So if we go in with that in mind, integrity-based selling, consultative selling, that of coaching and that of selling are very complementary skills. I'd like you to go in with the confidence that that which you do so well, the stuff that you knew before we ever met you, the interest in people succeeding, getting to know them, understand them, challenge them, all that, that is exactly the skill set of a successful salesperson. And the reason being is selling or coaching is helping people identify and isolate a need and work on filling that need with services or processes or something else to bring them to some closure. So an important focus for you to note as you think about and go out and be confident in all of this, use your coaching skills, and everything where the word selling is there, replace with coaching, you'll be just fine. And before you go off and start touting the features and the benefits of the awesome leadership circle profile, let's understand that that will only come when they first feel like they've got a built relationship with you. And finally, there are some things that we'll be talking about briefly about ways that you can kind of build that connection, not only understanding you as an individual, but understanding you as a business. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but also note the second webinar in July is primarily focused on using your coaching and development and business acumen skills in the concept of a larger organizational-wide initiative. So with all that as a warm-up today, the kind of the key focus areas, we're going to come back and just hit briefly the creative versus the reactive as the foundation for the leadership circle framework. As we talk about the concept of building a business case, let's be sure that you are at the front end of it. Let's make sure that if you're trying to influence me to be in a relationship with you, I need to understand what you do and how you represent all of your processes and services. Specifically, we'll talk about the leadership circle profile. It's very, very important that these conversations are yours. So the handout that I reference, it's a work in progress. So please know it's under construction. If there's anything that you'd love to add to it or whatever, please make sure Adele, give your feedback to Adele. We're trying to make this one beautiful global thing. But we've been collecting information about those people who sell it well, who represent it well, who describe it well. There's a lot of questions. I'll kind of walk you through this, but the whole point would be, don't write down every single word that Bob Anderson says or Mike O'Connor says or Adele says. You need to ingrain this stuff and make it yours. So one of the key outcomes, we'll position it in today's call, but I'm also going to give you some suggestions as next steps, is understand this in a way where you can then make it your own. So you'll be able to describe your business and what makes you unique. You'll be able to describe a leadership circle and what makes it unique. And we'll be able to talk about the leadership circle and how it's different from other instruments you might be using. All right? So this handout that we made reference to, please find it. Either you have it now or you'll take it after this call. It follows a series of questions one would think about as you're building a business case. The first set of conversation, and boy, I wish there was like a much smaller group. It would be so fascinating to have this as a conversation. But the first element is just building a case for leadership is important. Leadership is extremely important. And we all know, but sometimes our customers forget, we all know that really talented people, like all of us, we will join terrific organizations and we're going to leave really crappy bosses. We know that going to work every day and a strong leader is going to help create a culture where I'm thriving and contributing in a positive way. A weak leader is going to actually squelch me, limit information I'm willing to share, keep me in a little box, and maybe even keep me off target on mission. Leadership is critical in people engaging effectively and in alignment. And a lack of leadership can disrupt all of that. So leadership is essentially the most important variable. You all should be familiar with the Mastering Leadership book. The very first chapter or two, The Promise of Leadership, builds a compelling explanation for what's involved with that. Chapter 2 talks about the collective team and all the influence about what a collective team can do to influence positively or negatively organizational outcomes. A second thing we really want to emphasize is the real power of the creative versus reactive. And we're going to spend some more time on that. But it's the most important feature of the Leadership Circle framework. The whole framework is most unique because of the creative versus the reactive mindset. So we're going to spend more time on the call today. Especially today, there's these realities. And these realities are influence or impacting business. There's examples of it being influenced very, very positively. And there's examples of it being the inverse. I'll tell you at the Leadership Circle. First of all, I've been in this lockdown. It's called staying in place. My wife and I have been in our home for the last 16 days. Thank God I'm with her because I haven't touched or smelled another person in over 2 weeks. But what's happening at the Leadership Circle is our business is down. It's one of our realities that we're facing. And what's happening is a big part of our business are people like you. You know, the global practitioner community of 6,000 people, projects are slowing down, they're stalled, they're postponed. And that all makes perfect sense. But we also have coaches who are afraid to take action because they think it's a bad time or they're being disruptive. There's leaders that you serve who don't feel it's the best time to be asking for feedback. So there's all those things that are temporary, but they're slowing us down. And that's impacting our business. And on the flip side, there's other businesses that are just using this as a key opportunity to raise up the volume. The Japanese manufacturing model, when the lines get slow, let's ratchet up the training. There's other people who are taking advantage. We have some of our largest global customers are committing, let's do things now while things are quiet. Let's do things now because leadership is needed more than ever. The organization's in a lull, there's some sadness. Let's infuse the positive inoculation with some powerful coaching now. So we're seeing both sides to it. And I think that's an important element to keep in mind. The world needs what we offer now. They may not be ready exactly now, but please go forward just knowing that there are people who need to be seen, heard, redirected, understood. There are reactive tendencies that are being triggered that people haven't seen in the longest time. Those things that make me a less effective leader were managed pretty easily a couple weeks ago. Today, they're not. All those things are important. And so the role that all of us play, the coaching and the development piece, has a really, really critical and important place in this time where everybody has to be transforming. So keep that all in mind. We built a business case here in this document. We've helped build some explanation for what the research says about effective leaders outperform ineffective leaders and what that looks like, what effective leaders are doing, what ineffective leaders are doing. So all of this is included on the handout. And as you get familiar with it, I'd love to hear anything you have to say that you think would be important to edit or change, or something that you see that might be a nice addition. All right. Finally, the last part of this document, I just loaded this in a little bit. There are just some basic questions on consultative selling. And we're not going to hit those primarily today, but that's going to be a significant part of the June webinar. So just understanding and thinking about an organization, building relationship, who are the decision makers, what are the organizational priorities, and so forth. Those are all things that we'll be focusing on in June. So kind of stepping up a little bit, the objective of this is to enhance some confidence. A few things I'd like to remind you of, and then we'll get back into some details. And I say this, I say this because these are the kinds of things that people sometimes forget when they're new and they're feeling consciously incompetent with the new leadership circle framework. Let's remember that before you ever met the leadership circle, before you ever came to certification, you were a great coach. So let's just know that you are more than a great coach today as a result of knowing that. Point I'm trying to make is don't feel that now that you have new access to a rather complex assessment, that that makes you less. You're still the awesome coach that you always were, and now you have data to help inform the contributions that you make. Keep that in mind. And don't feel like you have to know every single bell, whistle, answer, etc. You've got enough to move forward. We recommend you just go. And no matter what, no matter how far removed you've been since you've last thought about all this, or how long it's been since you were certified, you're always going to know the leadership circle framework better than your client will. Just like they're always going to know themselves better than you do. So the whole point of this is to create a shared conversation with the data in the leadership circle profile, you all coming together, what we call creating a dance. You know just a little bit more than they do. They know a little bit more about themselves than you do. Together, you can make the important things happen. This has always been important. It seems to really be getting a lot of fanfare lately, just being vulnerable. More than ever, it's appropriate to acknowledge your vulnerabilities, your concerns, things that you're working on. I would suggest if I was helping you build your business plan, one of the very best things you could do is go back and think about the first time you got feedback about the leadership circle profile about yourself, what you learned about yourselves, and any changes or shifts you committed to as a result, and tell that story. And actually say, the reason I'm representing the leadership circle is a few years ago, I finally got some information about something that's been slowing me down my entire 48 years. It wasn't until I was 48 years old, folks, that I understood what pleasing was. I never understood when people gave me the feedback about I was too nice, too soft, blah, blah. I never knew how to respond to all that until I understood the powerful pull of what pleasing can do and how it can contradict my purpose and my mission. That was life-changing. And so when I tell a story like I did, or you were to tell your story, it builds credibility that you're representing something authentically that can really be a game changer for them. And finally, we just can't stress this enough. Just go out and do something. Like this week, go out and do something. Make it happen. Invite a conversation. If you're not ready for that, perhaps because of the climate of business, I'm going to give you some things that you can go study in on. So 2 weeks from now, you will be all the ready. Make some meaningful action now. I challenge each of you, if you kindly set aside 1 hour a week, dedicated specifically to your practice and specifically to leadership circle as a part of your practice. I'll give you suggestions, but just go off and do it. Let's not let great be the enemy of very good, and let's just get things out there and get going. So, Adele, let me just do a check. Is there anything happening in the chat room that we need to be talking about?
No, Mike, it's all good, and no questions at this point. But we obviously just got the early birds, so there's about 23 people on the call. So if you did want to open it up, feel free.
So far, we're doing well. I'll tell you, Adele, you and I have worked together for, I don't know, a long time, 9 or 10 years. This is me getting the coaching and the reminder to slow down and talk at a quiet pace. So I've got these little sticky notes on my nose. It's like, this is me talking slowly again.
You're doing great.
Yeah, there we go. So back to the point. People buy not because they understand, but they feel understood. I'll repeat it, but I think it's worth repeating. The very skills, the very motivations that brought you into the circle, into the community, into the coaching profession are the very skills that are appropriate in a selling or business development environment. If we're doing our work with ethics and integrity, which of course we are, there's no room for any of the manipulative, salesy kind of behaviors that gives us all heartburn. If you go in with true intention and interest in serving, and you go with all the good intentions of the purpose statement and the coaching piece, that very coaching that you're doing, helping somebody decide if the relationship with you or with your business is the right thing, that's exactly what the selling is. So, step one, you need to get conversational about what leadership is and why it's important. And that goes back to the handout that we talked about here. But the reality is leaders make an important impact on business, and effective leaders outperform ineffective leaders. We have research, and there's white papers you're familiar with, or you can find on the Leadership Circle webpage. There's research to show that more creative leaders are seen as more effective contributors to business outcome and are more highly respected. And there's a significant correlation to effective leaders, creative, less than effective leaders, reactive, and there's a business case for each of that. That in itself is one of the most compelling ROI research out in the market. So effective leadership is important. For those of you that have recently picked up the second book, Scaling Leadership, I pulled this slide right out of that, but we also know that leadership matters. Scaling Leadership, the whole book talks about what people say are important contributors to what they have to say about leaders they respect versus those that do not. And what we know from this research is when you're leading effectively, you make an impact on performance and culture and engagement and agility and innovation. We all know what that takes. It's the creative versus the reactive mindset. And when you think about the world, when you think about what the world needs, what it needs today more than ever, it needs performance. Culture is being challenged. People need to be engaged. They need to be agile. They need to innovate. So there's, I feel like I'm probably repeating myself too many times, but there's just a very strong, compelling explanation for leadership and why it's so important. I challenge you to get your words right. And I'll give you some places before this call's over, some places if you're still kind of figuring it out, if it's still under construction, I'll give you a couple of suggestions on where to look to maybe get that fine-tuned. Back to the whole thing about you. We have to first talk about you. I'm not going to sign on to a coaching relationship if I don't understand you. And there's a whole bunch of people in your city or your market who represent the leadership circle. So you will want to figure out in a way that's authentic to you what your brand is, who you are. I personally, different people have different views. Before I would commit to a particular relationship of any sort, I want to know why you're in this business, what you're passionate about, what your practice entails, where you've been, what your journey is. Just get your story, get it strong, and just say it proudly. And it doesn't have to be all picture perfect. Share some vulnerability. Get out there and explain to people who you are, why you do this, why this is your profession, why you chose the leadership circle, and what it is that you believe you can offer to help me with what I'm trying to achieve. With that, then, there's enough conversation going. Then you can start expressing interest in me, understanding my business, understanding what I'm trying to do, and the relationship begins. Another thing, and this is very, very common, especially if you're working with corporate organizations, people want to know what makes the leadership circle unique. And that's interesting because a lot of people in the world, I used to be this way, a lot of people think that 360s are bad. A lot of people have already determined that leadership 360s are not good. And it's unfortunate, but it's one of the two biggest challenges I have in my role representing the leadership circle across the world. People had a bad experience 20 years ago. There's a lot of 360s out there, and some of them are good, but some of them are not. There are 360s that have been done where everybody saw the feedback except for me. Or there's been 360s where I never saw the feedback. Or I got feedback from somebody who I didn't see as credible. Or maybe I saw feedback that I disagreed with or I didn't understand. I might have gotten a 360 feedback report that had consequences, or it might have measured stupid stuff that I don't care about. There's all sorts of things that people have experienced with 360s, and the leadership circle was exactly designed to not be any of those. So go in confidently explaining the things that you know are necessary and that you're a professional and you chose the leadership circle because of a lot of things. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just trust, please. It was built and created with the highest of integrity, first and foremost. And I think that's the difference between the handful of really good ones out in the market and those that are not. It's not a $59, drive-through kind of thing. It's built with some rigor and some discipline. It's got purpose and intention. It's a high-quality premier product because it expects high-quality premier results. So being prepared to address objections or to talk about what makes the leadership circle unique or different is important. Now, we have on our website a white paper or two that talks about how the leadership circle is different than other 360s. So you don't have to have all this memorized, but you should know it well enough to be able to be conversant. There's lots of things that people say they like about the leadership circle. I just kind of picked some of the most popular. It's common for people to be really pleased with it because of the very critical work that Bob Anderson did with creating the research and validating the instrument. He dedicated 10 years of his career, heavily investigated over 75 different thought leaders in the area of leadership effectiveness. And after he got all of this information and created some hypotheses, he then went back and did validation against it. He will say for every question in the leadership circle profile, there's another 10 that did not make it because they didn't match the validation piece. Another unique thing about the leadership circle, which I think is probably the most profound, is it measures both the reactive and the creative. The reactive and the creative. It looks at both. There are other instruments out there that do both, but it's not in one model. It's two different models. Then it requires an expert coach to kind of weave the two together. There's a lot of 360s out there that do either or. You hear about these competency-based assessments or 360s, and I don't want to use names, but the majority of the big ones out there tend to only focus on the creative competencies. There's nothing unique about the top half of our circle. You could look at a Lominger or a DDI or Center for Creative Leadership, many others. We all kind of measure the same thing. What gets the leadership circle unique is it also aligns with the underlying assumptions and beliefs, the reactive tendencies, and it shows the interconnectedness, the polarities between the two. That's really the game changer. So if you're expert in your profession and able and willing and interested in going deep with a client, and if you have a leader who's willing to go on that path with you, you've got a lot of terrific information to make some transformational shifts. If, on the other hand, you have all this access, but your client doesn't, you also can keep it lighter and meet your client where they are. So it's versatile. There's a lot that you can do or hold off on doing. We also get a lot of feedback that people appreciate the visual elegance of it, how a page at a glance shows you a lot. Now, people will first be overwhelmed, but in your capable hands, we can start to help them understand how to look at overarching patterns and trends. Not sure if you all know this, but not only do you have 29 domains of leadership that go all across the circle, but everything is in its particular place on purpose. There are important relationships between belonging and pleasing and passive, or strategy and vision and achieve result. Things are there for a reason, and you can also look at the polarities from one side of the circle to the other. So there's a whole bunch of fascinating dynamics going on with the architecture or the visual setup of this all. The percentiles, as you all know, probably one of the more complex elements of the profile. They're very, very worthwhile. They have a really big purpose, so it's worth the added effort. But it sometimes takes leaders a little bit of understanding about who this norm group is, why it matters, and so forth. But the percentiles have a lot of real great value. I spent the first 20 years of my coaching profession representing a different product. It's a bit embarrassing today, but I used to spend time talking with senior leaders about, hey, there's a gap of 3.8 to 5.0 on this particular competency. Let's work to close it. Sometimes they didn't care about it. They felt, that gap is small enough. I don't care. Now we have better access to, say, a 3.8 on a 5.0 scale. That actually puts you in the lowest quartile. Like, it is really important. It is an important thing that's worth considering. And so it has a lot of value there. And finally, the leadership circle, we are told more than ever, has some extraordinary developmental pathways. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. We are doing well in time. Adele, I'm going to ask if you just take a moment, open up the lines. Let's just see if there's anything, comment or questions about what anybody wants to say or ask about the leadership circle and what it does or how it's different.
Sure. So if you want to put your hands up, folks, if you'd like to chat with Mike. While we're waiting for that to happen, Mike, Dominique has posed a question. Do you know the size of the current norm base? How many leaders we've got in there?
Yes. Nobody ever knows exactly for sure.
Yeah, because it moves all the time, right?
Yeah. We probably last month exceeded 200,000 leaders across the world. So you, me, the leaders you serve, 200,000. We recently crossed that milestone. And the total evaluator, the average leader has about 11 evaluators. So the leader I'm sorry, the evaluator database, I believe, is 2.35 million.
Right. And Dominique, you ask if there's somewhere where you can track that number. And no, we don't have it public. And of course, the big change we made last October was about standardizing our global norm base. So it's no longer dynamic. It's a fixed norm base when you're running the results of your profile.
So what that means is, for lots of reasons, you know, the database was so huge and solid at 100,000, I'm sorry, 10,000 liters. Now we have 200,000. The system kept getting more and more sluggish because every time any one of us ran a report, it literally would algorithm against every single person in the entire database. So it was slow and it was vulnerable. So we took the standard, what is it, Adele? Is it 10,000 liters? Like a standard conglomerate of 10,000 across the world, and use that as our norm base. And periodically, like every quarter, we check to see if it's still valid. And we expect it will be because it's been valid consistently for the last 10 years. So that 10,000 is a preview, a snapshot. So as an example, there's noise that was in the system. You know, all of us highly creative, highly aware coaches, right? We were causing some halos in the system. For a while, it was a little bit too North American centric. No surprise to any of you. So now what we know is 9% of the global leadership population comes from Australia. 9% of the norm base is going to be represented Australia. 52% of the norm base is male. 52 of the new norm base will also be male. So we're trying to make things to be the exact duplication of the global mindset.
Yeah, great. We do have Alexander here with a question. Mike?
Hello, Mike. Greetings from New Zealand. Mike, I recall when I accredited in the tool several years back now, I think I learned that it was not possible to segment the norm base into industry sectors, for example. Is that still the case? I have one client who was really curious about how they would stack up within their sector. It's not a deal breaker, but I'm just curious about whether it's possible.
Thank you, Alexander. That's a challenge. It currently is, that option is currently not available. I'll make a few comments. It has been available in the past. We turned it off because we put as a higher priority some new security protocols that required programming and such required us to turn that feature off temporarily till that all goes. So that's where we are currently. We don't have a timeline and when we're going to turn it back on, but there's enough interest in the community that we want to turn it back on in the future. So I might think perhaps in the next year we might rethink that. Now, that said, from a marketing standpoint, it's a wonderful feature. Also said though, it surprised everybody, but I don't care how you sliced the industry, there was no industry that was ever so predominant that it shifted things more than 10%. So our healthcare clients or our religious sector or engineers will all say that they're a unique subset of leadership culture. And that might be true. But your organization that you work for is a bigger influence on how you show up as a leader than the industry or the profession that you're part of. So I know people would like to see all that, but it's not as useful as people might think or hope it would be. So I try to use that as a way to help people just be okay with it for the short term. Thank you, Alexander.
And then we've got a question from Gail. Gail.
Yes, thank you. So Mike, I get from time to time, and this isn't a view I share, but I do get from time to time clients saying, oh, it just seems, you know, the profiling tool seems really complicated. I just want something really simple. You know, can you give me something simple? This is way too complicated. It's too tough for a leader to get their head around. How do you deal with that objection?
Yep, it's a common objection. There's a few things, and challenge me on this, but I've been doing it for years. It's actually not complicated, it's complex. It's complete, there's a lot to it. But one of the things unique about the Leadership Circle is we require two things. We require a certified practitioner that has coaching background, like all of us here. And secondly, we require a 90-minute debrief minimum with each debrief. So with those requirements adhered to, in your capable hands, you can help guide people and get past all the complexity. And the whole point would be, with your capable hands, or perhaps some support from some of us to kind of get you all set, you should be able to sit down with a leader and help them identify the overarching patterns and trends. That's the real intent of this. So while there's all this information with your capable hands guiding them through it, let's identify the overarching patterns and trends. And then that overwhelming 14-page report that comes with it, you only go to the places that'll kind of help fill in some holes for some things that you've identified from the graph. So that's the reply there.
Great, thanks.
Thanks,
I hope
Gab.
that helped.
All right, Mike, that's it for now. So you can keep going.
Okay, take a deep breath. I'll slow down my pace and we'll keep doing it.
We're keeping up.
This is a slide many of you are familiar with. It's just a very general explanation about what 360 assessments are and what their benefits are. By the way, all of you will have this PowerPoint available to you. So I put this slide in almost just so you could use it for future use, but here's a few things that are unique about the leadership circle. Things that make us stand out. The fact that all this research has gone into it is extraordinary. So you can say with confidence that leaders that you're supporting are getting measured on things that are important, and they're getting developmental guidance and some things that'll help them make the shift. That's essential and that's critical. And I make that point despite my previous 20 years and what I used to do for profession. I make that point because that's so much more impactful than a homegrown organizational survey a large organization might have created to match their values. What it doesn't have is the research behind it to then say, now what do I do to close a gap? Another thing that's unique about the Leadership Circle profile is we take a very strong stand on confidentiality. So if you follow this the way that you're guided to, the only person that is going to see Alexander's report is me, the coach, and Alexander. If Alexander chooses to share this with others, he's welcome to. But more the message we send to organizations is, after a couple of coaching sessions, we're going to work with Alexander to identify some goals. Those goals can be put into a development plan, and we'll surely share that with the well-intended manager or human resources group. Another thing that we really emphasize, and while a lot of us talk about it, we're really serious about it, the Leadership Circle developmental path is an emphasis on both the strengths and the developmental gaps, both. Very, very firmly. These people, and I know you've got them in your client base, those people who want to tell me the 5 or 6 things I need to do to make these numbers better. What do I have to do to fix this, to make it all go away? That whole fixing strategy is a reactive tendency. Transformation, a commitment to a long-term goal, is a creative thing, but this whole fix it, making it go away, is a reactive strategy. So working with you, the coach, on developing strengths and closing gaps together is what happens. And that translates into a combination of our thinking and our behavior. The thinking is the reactive and the behavior is the creative. I pulled this slide out of the Scaling Leadership book. This is perhaps the most profound message in these tumultuous times. The whole, and there's a lot to this slide, but if you'll just recognize, the left-hand side talks about a mindset based on purpose, love, generative thinking, the whole creative lens. That's the left. And the right-hand side is about my opinion of myself is being founded by your opinions of me. I want to play it safe. I need to be really contributing in order to be safe. That whole reactive mindset. And that tension between the purpose-driven creative and the safety-driven reactive is the dance. It's the journey. Think about it. More than ever, we're seeing the world respond. And the messaging that we're seeing is either the high highs or the low lows. The things that are getting attention are the amazing, unbelievable stories of generosity and, selflessness and all that, or the real negative things that's like, oh my God, I'm so afraid to even walk out of my house, and it's that polarity. That's what the whole Leadership Circle model is all about. And you might have seen this model in your certification. We all have a choice in how we want to respond to any situation that we face. We're walking into a client meeting and we know that the client has a lot they want to say. If it's like, oh crap, we're going to get, our tails wounded and let's just go and try to walk out alive, that's a reactive state. And I'm going in as a problem that needs to be fixed to make this threat go away. Once all that subsides a little bit, I'm representing the left-hand side of this model. Once the anxiety lessens, we're going to go back into the equilibrium of what it used to be. This is also the Mike O'Connor approach to weight loss. Every January and February, carbs are down, sugars are down, clothes are feeling better. by about now, about March, okay, everything's fine now. I kind of take my foot off the brake. Before you know it, the 30 pounds I've lost over the last 90 days, they'll all be back on by December, and then we'll start this whole cycle all over again. That's the oscillation. The right-hand side, again, back to the analogy about we're going into a client meeting. They have a lot to say. We're so eager to meet them. Let's see what we can learn and grow and develop together in partnership with this very valuable customer. And just being passionate about this client and their needs and their interests being represented in our decision-making. And using that as something we're really, really passionate about. We take actions as a result of that. There you've got an outcome creating mindset that has more of an energy unleashing uplift. So folks, this very model is the very thing we're being challenged with every single day. Am I going into my day-to-day with a place of purpose? Am I going to my day-to-day in order to play it safe? Am I thinking big? Am I thinking small? Am I playing to win? Am I playing not to lose? This is the foundation of the Leadership Circle framework. We made reference to it again on this handout. I can't stress enough. You getting your confidence and comfort in describing the model, the framework, in a way that gets people to understand. We've got the creative competencies at the top. They're energy unleashing, and any of these 18 competencies will bring results with greater scalability, with greater ease. These reactive tendencies are not bad in and of themselves. They're not bad in and of themselves as long as we're managing them. But once they start getting a lock on us, once they start managing us, then we start finding ourselves falling into places that are less effective. And during these vulnerable times, the last couple of weeks in particular, there's a lot of people not feeling safe. They're worried about their health, their families, their jobs, their cash flow, the world as they know it. All these things are up in the air. It's natural to go into a place of fear and quiet and small. And that's fine, but it's not leadership. So when it's time to dust our knees off and start to take a little bit of control, working with somebody like each of you, let me look at where I am and let me see what kind of shifts I want to make. And that shift typically is looking up and finding something in the creative energy at the top of the circle. All right. So with all that, I'll bring that to closure with a simple model. Well, there's a lot here, but if we look in the upper right-hand side, you'll recognize VUCA as a common acronym for a world with a lot of volatility and uncertainty and complexity. The antithesis of that is the bottom right. Imagine a world where there's stability and certainty and everything is simple and clear. That's the equilibrium we're looking for. And then this orange box is the development gap. It's the element of complexity I'm currently prepared to handle versus that which I'm needed to handle. And the objective in my development is to try to minimize that gap a little bit. So where I'm comfortable at a status, I want things to be just the way they are, is a very appropriate, logical, safe, reactive stance. But if I'm wanting to be a meaning maker, like most of the people that hire coaches, I'm looking to up my game. I'm committing to a world that's more complex. In order to thrive with that, the research shows that the creative competencies help us more agile in dealing with that kind of complexity. You all don't know me, but I want to just give you a really brief example. By no means, despite my job and my career, by no means am I an outstanding leader. I don't claim to be. And in the Leadership Circle framework, I know where I'm vulnerable. Like many people in our coaching community, I've got the high pleasing and I've got the high driven. Most people have one or the other. I happen to have both. And there's a very, very heavy load to people who want to approach every day pleasing and driving. It's just exhausting. But I'm comfortable. I've been that way my whole life. I know it. Last week, amongst all this craziness going on in the world, and I've got children and a family and a job and all that, amongst all this, I woke up one day just kind of at a pause. Like I just was like waiting for somebody to tell me how I'm supposed to do my job today, just given all the craziness going on in the world. And it was really concerning me because of all the things I do and don't do, I'm not one who typically pauses. I usually have the opposite problem. I usually act too quick. I'm just pausing. It just felt really, really uncomfortable. It took me a while to get to grips and give myself some grace. I was being passive. And we all know that as a reactive tendency to keep us safe, passive. And it was really weird to me because I've coached a lot of people about being passive, but never myself. And it's like, it just felt so uncomfortable. But I was in very uncertain conditions, and it was just a place I've never really had access to before. Once I figured that out, and it didn't happen like that, it took a couple hours, I gave myself the permission to look up in the creative, like what can I go hang on to kind of get me through all this. And it just felt right at the time, and it worked. About 2 hours later, I went to relationships and caring connection. I just started sending love notes to family members, clients, checking in, loving on you, hope you're well, just all that kind of stuff. I just did that for a couple hours just to be something that I could do that I felt was productive and kind of got me through. And after a little while of that, I kind of got back into my rhythm. So what I was doing was I was actually addressing that developmental challenge. Sorry for too much detail, but I wanted to illustrate the point that we all are dealing with this. So give yourself the grace of being human, but also be looking for it with the clients you serve. So that superstar, awesome, kick-ass marketing executive that a month ago had it all under control may not today. Or that person that's just too busy to, hold on and keep a meeting or whatever, they may not be today. So I just encourage you just to go out and listen for and be ready to meet them where they are, but be ready to inoculate them with all that stuff that you do that makes you so awesome. The generosity, the commitment to development, the questions, the pausing, the holding accountable, all the coaching stuff. A few other points, and I think we'll have time to have a few minutes to talk. Again, the whole purpose of this is to just talk about how to speak or build a business case confidently about the leadership circle. Another thing that we get a lot of applause for is our commitment to development. We have leadership development plans available in the community. If you're not available, or if you don't know where to find these, let us know, but we have them on the TLC website. I want to make sure you guys know about a place called TLC Go, but developmental planning, we've got it, and they're free, and they're in Word documents, so you can brand them to have your client's logo or your logo or whatever you want. We've also got everybody who's gone through Leadership Circle. I'm surprised they don't have one within arm's reach. You've got your profile interpretation manual. It looks like that. Chock full of awesome developmental stuff. So as you're thinking about differentiating you as a representative of the Leadership Circle, as you think about the question that came up from Gail about how can we minimize some of the complexity, commit to one or two things, start and stop behaviors, use the profile interpretation manual to help make some connections, and you're in a good place to go. So we've got some things here on some do's and don'ts about leadership development planning. So this will be a document you can hold on to, but the point I want to make sure, I think it's important, the leadership circle will never say that you are a leader that's broken and needs to be fixed. Never. No matter what your reactive energy looks like, it's the way you're supposed to be today. And we're not asking you to commit to 7 or 10 changes, because everybody will just sort of block themselves out. The leadership circle developmental priorities process is, let's identify 1 or 2 creative competencies that you want to really lean into, sharpen, improve, do more of. Just 1 or 2, 1 or 2. And what's the one reactive tendency you want to relook at and maybe do different? That's all. And if you've got one of those highly controlling, aggressive, goal-oriented people that wants to really hit it hard, hit it fast, whatever, stay true to it. Joe, let's do 1 or 2 creative competencies first. And once you get that all figured out, we can always come back and do more. So that's the ask. And hopefully that'll minimize the complexity. So if nobody's seeing my feedback except for me, if I'm working with an awesome coach like you, if I've got developmental resources like the profile interpretation manual, if I'm being asked to identify 2 creative competencies max on where to lean into, 1 reactive tendency to manage differently, we're making it all manageable. So we've covered a lot here today. I'm going to leave you with one final thought, and then we'll open it up for any questions that you have. But there's a lot here, and it's harder today than it was, for sure. I don't want to downplay that, but if this is about building some confidence, please know you guys are very well equipped. You literally are well equipped, no matter where you are in your profession or your development journey. You know this tool and you know this framework and you know coaching well enough to go off and do really important things. So don't wait till everything is just perfect, because it never will be. But if you feel like you need an inch or two more of help in getting yourself readied, here are 4 or 5 resources that I hear are very, very worthwhile. The Mastering Leadership book, and don't repeat this because I'll deny it. Get yourself through like chapter 6 or 7. Not everybody's able to get all the way till the end of the chapter. First 6, 7, 8 chapters are terrific. And there's 3 chapters that build a really solid explanation about what creative and reactive is. Read them lightly and use them to help inform your way to describe creative and reactive. Secondly, we have an online resource tool called TLC Go. It's been around for a little while, but I don't believe I don't think we've launched it globally as well as we can. So if you have not looked at TLC Go in a while, go on and find it. It's changed. We've made some really nice improvements to it. If you don't know what TLC Go is, contact your service rep and they'll get you all set up. It is a really awesome arsenal of all sorts of great resources. Resources on how to do a debrief, resources on how to sell, resources on how to write proposals, how to price it. Like, there's dozens and dozens of things on TLC Go. Probably the most valuable suggestion I could offer you today, these days, YouTube. Go to YouTube. The Leadership Circle has a lot of different tutorials. One that's extremely powerful, it's getting a lot of headway. Bob Anderson, our founder, did something 7 or 8 years ago. It's a little outdated, but it's called Safety and Purpose. So if you go to YouTube, it's probably the top 3 or 4. Safety and Purpose. It's an 18-minute video that does an extraordinary job. And if you listen to it with the lens of today's crazy times, safety and purpose as it relates to the Leadership Circle framework. We've got the Leadership Circle website that has some white papers on it. And lastly, probably the best way, another good way I should say, they can't all be best, is go back and look at your Leadership Circle feedback report. Whether it was last year or 5 years ago, go back to the feedback report and see what there is to learn, and maybe make a new commitment to a few development priorities using the profile interpretation manual. So pick a couple of creative competencies you want to lean into, tighten them up with the profile interpretation manual, get your story and tell it to others. Would be another profound thing to do. If you feel like you're a little out of sync with how to do a debrief, we've got great resources on TLC Go. Another thing, business is slow for some of us these days. Find a buddy. If you can't find a buddy, reach out to Adele. She'll find a buddy for you. Find somebody, switch your electronic feedback reports, and just debrief each other, just to kind of get yourself kind of warmed up again. In closing, what I hope we've imparted today, and we will welcome any feedback. Your feedback will help inform what the next webinar will be about. We're hoping that you will have confidence and capability in telling the world your unique story. Hopefully, as a result of what you've been thinking about today, you're in a position to craft, design, or explain who you are, what your practice is, and what makes you unique. Secondly, in your own words, describing how to position the Leadership Circle profile as a contributor to the kind of work that you're doing, and be able to address questions when people want to know what makes it unique or different from others. And so the world can understand why you proudly represent an ambassador in the Leadership Circle community, but why you represent the Leadership Circle profile. So with all that, Adele, if you'll turn the recording off, I'm willing to stay on for a while. If people want to stick around and talk or have questions or whatever, I'm happy to stick around with you all for a bit.